A sudden piercing cry sliced through the tranquil hum of Central Park. "Daddy, that's my brother!" Emily's small voice, usually a melody of innocent joy, now held an urgent, almost defiant certainty. James Whitaker, a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms, froze. The world seemed to tilt beneath him, the quiet afternoon dissolving into a dizzying blur. "Daddy, look! He looks just like me and like you!" Emily tugged fiercely at his hand, her tiny finger jabbing towards a distant path. He'd poured every ounce of his being into raising her since Clare, his beloved wife, had been cruelly taken by cancer. These weekend walks, a ritual of solace, were his anchors to both his past love and the vibrant little girl who had become his entire universe. Now, her words shattered that fragile peace. "What did you just say?" he managed, his voice a strained whisper, his eyes narrowing in bewildered confusion. Emily spun to face him, her pink dress a blur of motion, cheeks flushed not with childish play, but with an undeniable conviction. "That boy over there, Daddy. By the fountain," she insisted, her gaze unwavering. "He's my brother." James's gaze followed hers, slowly sweeping the path, until it landed on a small figure near the fountain. A boy, no older than 5, sat hunched on the cold concrete bench, his small body almost swallowed by the faded, threadbare clothes that hung loosely on him. A battered cardboard box was clutched fiercely to his chest, his only apparent possession. His shoes were an unfortunate collection of worn leather and loose stitches. But as James's eyes met the boy's, a jolt, sharp and undeniable, went through him. It wasn't the destitution that held him captive, but the eyes, an astonishing, piercing shade of brilliant blue, an exact mirror of Emily's own. "Emily, please," James managed, forcing a calm he didn't feel into his voice. "Don't say such things. You don't have a brother. It's just you and me." But Emily's eyes, wide and earnest, held no trace of childish make-believe. "No, Daddy," she countered, her voice firm. "I know it. That's my brother. I feel it." James stared, a profound unease settling in his gut. This wasn't a whimsical fantasy. The boy's eyes, the delicate curve of his cheek, the subtle slope of his nose, a chilling familiarity began to surface, pulling at a half-forgotten thread of memory. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against a wall of growing dread. The boy, who had been watching them with a silent, wary intensity, held his gaze, unblinking. With a growing sense of trepidation, James began to walk towards the boy, Emily's small hand still tightly clasped in his. He knelt, bringing himself to the child's eye level. "Hey there," he offered gently, his voice soft, non-threatening. "What's your name?" The boy tightened his grip on the cardboard box, his expression unreadable, offering no reply. James tried again, a reassuring smile on his face. "I'm James, and this is my daughter, Emily. We were just enjoying a walk in the park." The boy's bright blue eyes flickered to Emily, then back to James, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "Noah," he whispered, the name barely audible, a fragile sound carried on the breeze. "Noah," James repeated, the name tasting strangely familiar on his tongue. "That's a very nice name, Noah. Is your mom nearby?" Noah hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground before mumbling, "At home. She's sick." A cold dread began to coil in James's gut, tightening his chest. He pressed on, his voice carefully controlled. "Do you live far from here, Noah?" The boy looked up, his voice gaining a touch of quiet desperation. "We live in the basement apartment on 43rd Street. Mama doesn't usually let me go far, but today she was sleeping too long and there wasn't any food, so I came out. James's breath hitched. Do you have a dad, Noah? He asked, the words catching in his throat, suddenly heavy with unspoken meaning. Noah simply shook his head. Mama said he left before I was born. A profound dizziness swept over James, threatening to send him tumbling. He tried to dismiss the insidious thought, to shove it back into the darkest corners of his mind. But Noah's small face, so starkly similar to Emily's, made it impossible to ignore. The boy's features etched with weariness, but still holding that startling genetic echo, hammered at the walls of James's memory. His mind reeled, hurtling backward through the years, a blur of forgotten faces and distant events. 6 years ago, a woman. She had worked briefly at his company, a quiet, unassuming presence named Mary Carter. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the memory solidified, chilling him to the bone. She had been let go under a cloud of complicated circumstances, a messy mix-up with accounting files that had spiraled inexplicably out of control. She hadn't argued. She hadn't fought the dismissal. She had simply vanished. Could it be? Could it be? James reached into the small backpack slung over his shoulder, the one Emily had insisted on bringing, brimming with her favorite snacks. He pulled out a wrapped sandwich and extended it gently towards Noah. Here, he offered, his voice a soft invitation. You must be hungry. Noah's eyes, those startling blue eyes, fixed on the sandwich. He hesitated, then slowly, cautiously, reached out and took it. Thank you, he mumbled, a barely audible whisper. James watched as the boy ate, slowly, meticulously, as if each bite was a precious commodity, as if he expected it to be snatched away at any moment. There was a heartbreaking grace in his small, huddled posture, a silent testament to a life spent trying to be invisible. Beside him, Emily had settled cross-legged on the grass, a bright, unburdened smile on her face. Hi, Noah, she chirped, her voice full of uncomplicated warmth. I like your eyes. They're just like mine. Noah looked at her, blinking, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile ghosted across his lips. A sharp ache pierced James's heart. He stood, stepping back a pace, trying to draw a steadying breath. He looked at Emily, then at Noah, then back again. Same eyes. Same delicate, facial structure. The resemblance was no longer a haunting possibility. It was an undeniable, irrefutable fact. His hand instinctively went to his phone, dialing Monica, his assistant. Monica, he said, his voice taut with an urgency he couldn't mask. I need you to find everything you can about a former employee. Mary Carter. She worked here about 6 years ago. Start with HR records. Anything you can get your hands on. Monica, ever the professional, didn't ask questions. Yes, Mr. Whitaker. I'm on it. James ended the call and looked down at the 2 children. Emily was now happily showing Noah her stuffed bunny, chatting away as if they had been lifelong companions. He knelt again. Noah, he said, his voice gentle, carefully calibrated. How would you feel about coming with us for a little while, just to have a good meal and make sure you're okay? Then I'll take you back to your mom. Noah stared at him for a long, silent moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded, clutching the half-eaten sandwich and his cardboard box even tighter to his chest. James stood, lifting Emily effortlessly into his arms, then placed a gentle, reassuring hand on Noah's small shoulder. He had no idea what truths lay buried in the past, what revelations Monica's research would unearth. But a profound, unshakable feeling settled over him. His life had just changed forever. And it had all begun with a little girl in a pink dress, pointing across the park, uttering words he knew he would never forget. "Daddy, that's my brother." The elevator doors glided open, revealing James's penthouse, a luminous expanse of glass and polished surfaces, crowning a tower that soared above Central Park. Noah hesitated at the threshold, a small, fragile figure clutching his tattered cardboard box, as if it were the only thing tethering him to the earth. "Come in, buddy," James said, his voice soft, inviting. "You're safe here." Emily, already a whirlwind of motion, darted ahead, her curls bouncing as she raced down the wide hallway. "Come on, Noah! You have to see my room! It's pink and it has stars on the ceiling!" Noah stepped inside slowly, his eyes wide, taking in the gleaming floors, the towering windows that frame the city, the sparkling chandelier suspended high above. It was a world utterly alien to him, a stark contrast to the cracked sidewalks and leaky roofs of his own familiar neighborhood. Still hugging his precious box, he followed Emily's excited voice down the hall. James watched them disappear into the bright confines of Emily's room, then turned and walked towards his home office. He settled into his chair, the leather creaking softly, and opened a locked cabinet tucked away beneath his desk. Inside lay a collection of old company records, documents he hadn't touched in years. With a deep breath, he pulled out the dusty employee files, began flipping through them page after page until he found her name, Mary Carter. He stared at the file. The photo stapled in the corner showed a young woman with warm golden hair and a gentle smile. She had been a receptionist for less than a year. He vaguely recalled the incident, a misunderstanding about a client report spiraling into an argument between her and a junior manager. He remembered that day. He had been exhausted, overwhelmed, and quick to side with his manager. He had signed the termination papers without asking a single question. He never saw her again. But then, a forgotten detail surfaced. There had been an email, or perhaps more than one. Messages he'd flagged for follow-up, then allowed to be buried beneath an avalanche of contracts and board meeting agendas. She had tried to reach him, and now the pieces were falling into place with a horrifying clarity. Mary Carter had left the company, pregnant and alone. He found a recent address linked to her name through the company's old emergency contact form. It was in Brooklyn, an apartment in a run-down building known for cheap rentals and poor maintenance. James searched the address online, and images of cracked walls and graffiti-tagged doors flashed across his screen. A cold, heavy pit grew in his stomach. Noah had been telling the truth. His mother was sick, and she had been raising their child in grinding poverty, while James had built skyscrapers and attended galas. James leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face with both hands, the weight of a monstrous guilt clawing at him. He hadn't just forgotten her. He had dismissed her, discarded her, precisely when she needed him most. And now there was a child. His child. He couldn't be absolutely certain yet, but in his heart, he already knew. That night, as Emily and Noah played with building blocks on the plush living room carpet, James made a phone call. He contacted a discreet charity organization, one known for delivering anonymous aid to struggling families. He gave them Mary's address. "I want a full grocery order sent," he instructed, his voice low and firm. "Include fruits, vegetables, meat, medicine, vitamins, cleaning supplies. No branding, no notes. Just deliver it quietly. Understood?" "Understood," the representative replied without hesitation. "It will be there by morning." He ended the call and returned to the living room. Emily had draped a blanket over two chairs, meticulously crafting a makeshift fort. She crawled inside and, with a triumphant giggle, pulled Noah in after her. "This is the castle, and you're the prince," she declared. Noah smiled, a small, hesitant but profoundly real smile that transformed his tired features. A lump formed in James's throat. The way the boy responded to simple kindness. The way he looked at Emily as if she were the very sun. The subtle way his shoulders relaxed, just slightly, when no one raised their voice. James had seen all of this before. A reflection of himself, of people who had been forced to grow up far too fast. He stood at the edge of the scene, a silent observer. He knew, with a sudden, absolute clarity, that he had to do more than send groceries. He had to face Mary, confront the truth, offer his profound apologies, and be ready for whatever answer she gave him. The next morning, James dressed quietly, while Emily and Noah still slept soundly. When they eventually woke, he prepared them a special breakfast: fluffy pancakes, fresh strawberries, and bright orange juice. He told Emily they were going on a special trip, on a little adventure. Noah looked nervous, his blue eyes wide. "Are we going far?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not too far," James replied, his tone reassuring. "Just somewhere important." He packed a small bag for the boy, tucking in clean clothes and a new toy Emily had insisted on giving him: a brightly colored race car. As they settled into the car, James's driver met his gaze in the rearview mirror, a silent acknowledgement of the palpable tension. "Where to, Mr. Whitaker?" he inquired. James hesitated, just for a second, then exhaled slowly. "Brooklyn," he said finally. "I'll give you the address on the way." He leaned back against the plush leather seat, staring out the window as the gleaming Manhattan skyline gradually receded, its towering symbols of wealth giving way to the worn brick and rusted fences of a different world. His heart hammered against his ribs as they neared the address. Today, he would face the past. Today, he would finally know if the boy beside him was truly his son. And if he was, James vowed silently, he would never let him go again. The car crawled through a narrow street, lined with buildings scarred by graffiti and adorned with rusted fire escapes. James sat in silence, watching the scenery transform from sleek glass towers to crumbling brick and worn sidewalks. He had driven through neighborhoods like this countless times before, but today, every cracked pane and peeling paint chip felt intensely personal. When they finally arrived, he stepped out of the car, Noah by his side. The boy clutched his small bag, his eyes scanning the building's peeling paint and the dim, cavernous hallway. James took a deep breath, steeling himself, and knocked on the faded green door of apartment 4B. Footsteps approached, hesitant at first, then growing firmer. The door creaked open. Mary. Her eyes, still that striking blue, widened in disbelief. Her once golden hair was pulled back in a tired bun, her face pale and thinner than he remembered, yet it still held a quiet grace that James recognized instantly. "Noah!" she gasped, her voice raw with surprise and relief. The boy rushed into her arms, burying his face in her side. "Mama!" Mary clutched him fiercely, then looked up, her gaze hardening as it met James's. Her voice dropped, cold and sharp. "James, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," he said softly, his voice strained. "Emily, my daughter, she saw Noah. She said he's her brother. I didn't believe it at first, but I need to know the truth." Mary's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in her cheek. "You don't get to ask questions," she stated, her voice trembling with barely suppressed anger. "Not after what you did." "Please," James implored, his voice laced with desperation. "Just give me a few minutes." She held Noah close, her gaze unwavering. "I was pregnant," she began, her voice quivering with remembered pain. "I tried to tell you. I sent emails. I called. But no one ever let me through. Then I got fired. I had nothing." James looked stunned, his face a mask of disbelief. "Mary, I never saw any of that. I swear." She let out a short, bitter laugh, devoid of humor. "Of course you didn't. You were too busy being important. I was 24 and I was terrified. Then I had Noah, and I raised him alone." James's throat tightened, a painful knot forming. "I'm so sorry. I should have asked. I should have looked for you." Mary shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "You don't get to show up now and play savior. Noah has a life. It's not much, but it's ours." He swallowed hard, the question burning on his tongue. "Mary, is he my son?" She hesitated, her eyes searching his. Then, with a fresh tear rolling down her cheek, she nodded. "Yes, but I don't want your money. I just want to protect him." James knelt beside her, his voice imbued with earnestness. "I'm not here to take him away. I just want to help." Mary's eyes remained wary, filled with a deep-seated distrust. "I don't know if I can forgive you." "I understand," he said, his voice quiet. "But please, let me try." He reached into his coat and placed a thick envelope on the worn counter. "This isn't for forgiveness. It's for Noah. Rent, medicine, food. I'll come back tomorrow." Mary picked up the envelope, her fingers trembling. The rigid hardness in her gaze softened, just slightly. "Will you let me take a DNA test?" James added softly, his voice full of hope. "Just to be sure?" She hesitated again, her eyes searching his for a long moment, then nodded. "Fine," she conceded, her voice weary. "But no promises." James stood, a sense of fragile relief washing over him. "That's all I ask." He looked at Noah, who held his mother's hand, yet stared at James with a cautious, unblinking curiosity. James reached out, gently touching Noah's shoulder. "I'll see you soon. Okay?" Noah gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then, without warning, he stepped forward, his small arms briefly wrapping around James's leg in a quick, silent hug. Mary said nothing, but her eyes held a flicker of something new. As James walked down the hall, his heart, though heavier than it had ever been, felt a strange, burgeoning sensation rising within it. Hope. The envelope trembled in James's hand as he stood in his office, staring out over the sprawling Manhattan skyline. He had read it 3 times, but the words still hit him with the force of a tidal wave. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. Noah was his son. He exhaled slowly, a long, drawn-out breath, then looked at the photo on his desk. Emily, grinning widely in her pink dress. He picked up his phone. 2 hours later, Noah stood at the threshold of James's penthouse, no longer a cautious guest, but unequivocally his family. Emily raced to him, her face alight with pure joy. "Noah, you're back. You're my big brother now, for real." She tugged him excitedly into the living room. "This is your room now, or we can build another fort." James watched them quietly, a rare peace settling deep in his chest. But the moment was short-lived. His phone began to buzz incessantly, a relentless vibration in his hand. The news had broken. "Millionaire has secret love child," blared one headline. "James Whitaker's hidden past exposed," screamed another. "Whitaker heir found in Brooklyn." Paparazzi already swarmed his building's entrance. His office was overwhelmed with calls. The board of directors demanded an emergency meeting. You should have handled this privately, James. Leonard Chase, a senior board member, clipped, his voice laced with thinly veiled disgust. This is damaging. Our stocks are slipping. This isn't a scandal, Leonard, James retorted, his voice steel. It's my son. You're risking our reputation, another director added, his tone accusing. James's voice sharpened, cutting through the static. If being a father is a risk, then perhaps we need to rethink what we stand for. He ended the call abruptly, staring out at the indifferent city. Back inside, Noah was quiet, polite, but profoundly withdrawn. He sat alone during meals, spoke little, and often stared intently at the door, waiting for a mother who wasn't coming tonight. James saw it all. Money could build safety, provide comfort, but it couldn't instantly build trust, or mend a broken spirit, or conjure love. That evening, he decided to try something different. Noah, he said gently, kneeling beside him, his voice soft. How about we make pizza tonight? Just us, me, you, and Emily. Noah blinked, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Make it? Yes, James nodded, a small smile forming. From scratch. Emily clapped her hands, ecstatic. I want pepperoni flowers again. They rolled dough, made a joyful mess with flour, and decorated their pizzas with olive smiles and pepperoni blossoms. For the very first time, genuine laughter filled the grand kitchen. The immense penthouse, previously a cold monument to success, suddenly felt like a true home. After dinner, James brought out a gleaming red bicycle, identical to Emily's own. This is for you, he said softly, holding it out. You and your sister are a team now. Noah stared at the bicycle, then at James. He didn't speak, but he nodded, and the smallest, most real smile James had seen yet curled his lips. Across the city, in her small apartment, Mary sat on her couch, endlessly scrolling through news articles. Images of James's face, now everywhere, filled her screen. With Noah, were everywhere. Her chest tightened with a strange mixture of apprehension and a nascent, unfamiliar warmth. He looked genuine, but could he, the man who had dismissed her so carelessly, truly have changed? Her phone buzzed, vibrating against her thigh. A text message. James Whitaker. Mary, I know this is a lot, but I want to do this right. For Noah and for you. Please come visit. No pressure. Let's figure this out. Together. She read it, again, and again, then slowly set the phone down. She remembered countless nights rocking Noah to sleep, consumed by the gnawing worry of whether she had made the right choice, keeping him from his father. But now, that man, the one who had broken her heart, had faced a media storm, publicly acknowledged Noah, and stood firm. Maybe, just maybe. In the penthouse, Noah and Emily were curled up under a plush blanket, a cartoon flickering in front of them on a giant screen. Noah's head rested gently on Emily's shoulder, a picture of quiet contentment. James stepped out onto the balcony, drawing in the cool night air. He had failed before, irrevocably, but he vowed with every fiber of his being he would not fail again. Tomorrow, Mary would come, and he would be ready. Mary stepped out of the elevator, her hands clenched tightly around the strap of her purse, her heart a drumbeat against her ribs. The penthouse doors opened, revealing a flood of warmth and light from within. Laughter echoed from the living room, light, unrestrained children's laughter. She hesitated, a wave of apprehension washing over her. James greeted her with a soft, gentle smile. Mary, he said, his voice quiet. Thank you for coming? She nodded stiffly, her posture rigid. I'm here for Noah. James simply stepped aside, letting her in without another word, understanding her guardedness. Noah was sprawled on the floor beside Emily, both children surrounded by a colorful chaos of puzzle pieces and crayons. He looked up, his face lighting up with pure, unadulterated joy. "Mama!" he called, scrambling to his feet and running into her outstretched arms. Mary knelt, hugging him tightly, breathing in his familiar scent. "How are you, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I like it here," he said, pulling back slightly to beam at her. "Emily's funny. We're drawing planets." Mary managed a faint smile, but her eyes flicked towards James, still wary, still guarded. As the children returned to their play, James quietly offered her a cup of tea and motioned towards the comfortable sitting area. "Can we talk?" She sat down, her back straight, her guard still firmly in place. "I've made arrangements," James began, his tone calm, steady. "For your medical treatment, I spoke with the physician at the Ridgeway Center. You'll have access to anything you need, no cost to you." Mary stiffened, her eyes flashing. "I didn't ask for your charity." "I know," he said gently, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't charity, Mary. It's the least I can do. For what I took from you." She looked away, silent, her jaw tight. "I also spoke to a partner company," he continued, his voice even. "They have an opening in their communications team. If you're interested, it's yours. No obligations." Mary raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something resembling skepticism in her eyes. "So now I owe you a job, too?" "No," James said, meeting her gaze directly. "You owe me nothing. I just want to help. You deserve a life that isn't built on surviving." Mary stared at him, conflict etched on her face. She had imagined this meeting would be filled with pretense, with hollow words and grand gestures, but instead, here he was, not asking for her forgiveness, just quietly, genuinely trying to fix what had been broken. Later that evening, while she watched Noah play with Emily, something remarkable happened. Noah was building a towering structure of blocks. It toppled over with a clatter, and Emily giggled. James bent down to help him rebuild it, his large hands carefully guiding Noah's small ones. "Want to try again?" he asked, his voice warm and encouraging. Noah looked up at him, and without thinking, without hesitation, he said softly, "Okay, Dad." James's heart caught in his chest, froze. So did Mary. Noah, oblivious to the profound significance of his innocent utterance, continued stacking blocks, his small brow furrowed in concentration. James swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. He did not speak, but his eyes met Mary's across the room, shimmering with unshed emotion, a silent plea for understanding. Mary said nothing. She simply watched them, her heart aching with a complex mix of past pain and a fragile, burgeoning hope. The next morning, as she gathered her few belongings, she found a small, elegantly wrapped box placed on the side table, accompanied by a folded note. She opened it, her fingers trembling. Inside lay a delicate silver necklace with a circular pendant, an engraved disc with two names subtly etched into its surface: Noah and Emily. The note, in James's clear hand, read, "So you always remember that whatever happens between us, we are still a family because of them." Her hands trembled as she closed the box, a wave of emotion washing over her. She walked into the bright kitchen where James stood, already preparing breakfast with the children, a domestic scene that felt utterly surreal. She cleared her throat softly. "James," she began quietly, "I heard about my mother's hospital bill, the one that got paid last week." James looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "I didn't tell you she was sick," Mary continued, her voice gaining a touch of bewildered gratitude. "But you found out, and you helped." "I did not want to make a show of it," James said simply, his gaze steady. "I just wanted to help her get better." Mary's voice cracked, brimming with unshed tears. "Why are you doing all this?" "Because I failed you once," James said, his voice raw with regret. "And I will spend the rest of my life trying not to fail you again." Mary stood still for a long moment, absorbing his words, then nodded slowly. A profound decision etched on her face. "Noah can stay here for a while," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "He seems happy. He deserves that." "And you?" James asked gently, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know yet," she replied honestly, her gaze meeting his. "But I'm willing to give you a chance to show me." James smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile, careful not to push for more. That evening, as she prepared to leave, Noah ran to the door and hugged her tightly. "I'll be okay, Mama," he said, his small voice confident. "We're a team now." She kissed his forehead, a soft, lingering touch. "Always." As the elevator doors closed behind her, Mary held the silver necklace in her hand, her fingers brushing over the engraved names. Maybe, just maybe, healing had truly begun. Noah's first day of school arrived, a swirling mix of quiet dread and excited anticipation. Emily, proudly wearing her bright pink backpack, held his hand tightly as they walked into the bustling classroom. She chatted endlessly, completely unbothered by the sea of new faces. Noah, however, felt the eyes on him, the hushed whispers that started even before the bell rang. Some kids noticed his shoes were slightly older, his backpack simpler than theirs. One boy, bolder than the rest, sneered. "Hey, isn't that the kid from the news? The one who lived in the slums?" A few others giggled, their cruel amusement echoing in the air. Noah's shoulders stiffened. He lowered his gaze, silent, trying to make himself invisible. But Emily, sensing his distress, spun around, her eyes flashing with a fierce protectiveness. She stood directly in front of the offending boy, her tiny fists balled at her sides. "You stop it!" she declared, her voice surprisingly firm and louder than expected for a 3-year-old. "Noah is my brother. He's the best, and you're mean." The classroom fell into an astonished silence. Noah looked up at her, stunned, his blue eyes wide. Emily, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened, turned back, grabbed his hand again, and smiled brightly. From that moment on, the casual teasing faded, replaced by a quiet, protective aura that surrounded Noah whenever Emily was near. He found a deep sense of safety, a refuge beside her. At home, James and Mary worked together to help Noah navigate his transition. They sat at the grand dining table in the evenings, patiently going over homework, James explaining math concepts, Mary patiently helping with reading. On weekends, they took the children to the park, where Emily, with her characteristic enthusiasm, insisted they all ride the carousel together. Noah's initial apprehensions slowly melting into joyful laughter. James diligently packed snacks. Mary brought juice boxes. And for the first time in years, they moved as a cohesive unit, a true family. Some moments were small, almost imperceptible, yet quietly profound. Like when James instinctively handed Mary a sweater during a chilly afternoon, or when she, without thinking, adjusted his tie before a school event. The steady rhythm of co-parenting fostered a new familiarity, and that familiarity, in turn, slowly warmed into something gentler, more tender. Then came the parent-teacher night. The classroom was cheerfully decorated with crayon drawings, a vibrant gallery of childhood imagination. Parents mingled in hushed clusters, exchanging pleasantries. James stood beside Mary, both listening attentively to Noah's teacher, when a woman with designer heels and a sharp, brittle tone approached. I suppose it must be rather strange for someone like you to be here, the woman said, addressing Mary with a condescending smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. You know, not everyone fits in at schools like this. Mary stiffened, her jaw tightening. James stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Mary and the woman. His voice was calm, but firm, with an undeniable edge of authority. Excuse me? The woman blinked, clearly startled by his intervention. I meant no offense. Of course, she stammered, recovering quickly. It's just, well, some people come from very different circumstances. James placed a protective hand gently on Mary's back, a clear signal. Mary is the mother of my son, he stated, his voice resonating with quiet power. She raised him with strength and love under impossible conditions, and I respect her more than anyone else in this room. The woman faltered, her face reddening, then turned away without another word, melting back into the crowd. Mary stood frozen for a moment, her eyes glistening. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly, a tremor in her voice. Yes, I did, James replied, his gaze unwavering. Because it's true. A few days later, James organized a family picnic in Central Park. He packed a basket filled with handmade sandwiches, crisp apple slices, and juice boxes, just as Mary used to do for Noah. They laid out a large blanket beneath the wide, sheltering branches of an ancient tree. Emily and Noah chased each other across the sun-dappled grass, their laughter echoing through the park while James and Mary watched from the sidelines, occasionally exchanging smiles. James tossed a ball to Noah, who caught it with a triumphant grin. Emily clapped and cheered, spinning in circles, lost in her own joyful world. Mary, sitting nearby, couldn't help but smile, a warmth spreading through her chest. As the sun began to dip lower, painting the sky with hues of orange and gold, Emily walked back to the blanket, her cheeks flushed with exertion. She climbed into Mary's lap, snuggling close, then wrapped her tiny arms around her, holding on tight. My mommy is gone, she whispered, her voice small and sad. But you're really nice. Can you be my mommy too? Mary's breath caught in her throat, a wave of profound emotion washing over her. She looked down at the child in her arms, so innocent, so warm, so utterly sincere. I miss having a mommy, Emily murmured, her voice barely audible. But I like you. Tears welled in Mary's eyes, hot and unexpected. She held Emily close, her heart aching in ways she hadn't anticipated, a mix of sorrow and overwhelming tenderness. That evening, as they packed up their picnic things, Mary walked beside James, quieter than usual. He glanced at her, sensing the shift in her mood. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded slowly, thoughtfully. I've been thinking, she said, her voice gentle, about what's best for Noah and for Emily. James listened patiently, his full attention on her. I want to move closer, she continued. Maybe not here, but near enough that the kids can be together. It will make things easier. James smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression. I think that's a great idea. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment more before Mary added, her voice a little softer, and maybe we can talk more about the past, about everything. James looked over at her, the wind rustling gently through the trees around them. I'd like that, he said, his voice sincere. Together they walked forward, not as two people forever divided by time and mistakes, but as two parents, slowly, cautiously rediscovering trust, embarking on a path of healing, and nurturing something that now truly resembled hope. The weeks passed quietly, beautifully. In the rhythm of shared breakfasts and nightly bedtime stories, James and Mary found a new closeness, one born not from obligation, but from a genuine, burgeoning trust. They spoke honestly, laughed more freely, and together they raised two children who, in their innocence and boundless joy, effortlessly mended what had once been irrevocably broken. Noah and Emily were now inseparable. They called each other brother and sister, as if they always had, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. One sunny afternoon, Mary found them hunched over a giant sheet of paper spread across the living room floor, paintbrushes clutched in their small hands. "What are you working on?" she asked, kneeling beside them, her heart already swelling. Emily beamed, her face smeared with colorful paint. "Our family picture! That's you and Daddy, and Noah and me, and Mr. Snuggles, too!" Mary smiled, her eyes softening at the colorful, chaotic masterpiece that perfectly captured their new reality. That night, James carefully hung the painting in the hallway, prominently displayed. "This belongs here," he said, his voice quiet but firm. As their bond deepened, a lingering caution still remained between them. One evening, James turned to Mary over steaming mugs of coffee. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice hesitant. "Maybe we should live together again. All of us." Mary stiffened slightly. "James?" "I know it's a lot," he added quickly, sensing her apprehension. "I appreciate it," she said gently, her gaze steady. "But I've fought hard for my independence. I'm not ready to give that up." James nodded, understanding. "I understand." A small smile touched her lips. "But if the offer to help with the bakery still stands?" "It does," he interrupted, his face lighting up. "Absolutely." He found a cozy space near the kids' school, quietly took care of all the necessary paperwork, and then stepped back, letting Mary lead the entire process. She meticulously chose the name, curated the menu, and even selected the tiles. What she didn't know, however, was what James had named the shop behind the scenes. At the grand opening, balloons fluttered merrily, neighbors lined up eager for a taste, and Noah and Emily, proudly wearing matching aprons, handed out warm, freshly baked cookies. Mary stepped outside, a radiant smile on her face, and looked up at the newly installed sign. It read, "Lucia's Dream." She froze. Lucia. Her late mother's name. The one who had always believed in her baking, even when Mary herself hadn't. The one who had wanted nothing more than to see her daughter truly smile again. Tears welled in Mary's eyes, hot and unexpected. James stepped quietly beside her. "I wanted to honor her," he said softly. "And you." Mary could only nod, too moved to speak, her heart overflowing. That night, after the last guest had left and the kids were finally dozing on the bakery bench, something unexpected happened. Noah developed a fever. It rose quickly, his small body burning to the touch. Mary panicked, her usual calm dissolving into fear. But James stayed perfectly calm, helping cool Noah's skin with damp cloths, whispering reassurances, his presence a steady anchor in the storm. They stayed by his side all night, a silent vigil. Mary held Noah's hand, her fingers intertwined with his. James wrapped an arm around her, a comforting presence that she leaned into without thinking. Together they waited, watching every breath. Just before dawn, Noah stirred, his eyes fluttering open, a pale but conscious flicker. "Are you both staying?" he whispered, his voice weak. "We're right here, buddy," James said, his voice thick with emotion. Noah reached out, his small hand holding both of theirs. "I want you to stay together," he murmured, his gaze earnest. "I want us to be a family." They didn't speak. They just looked at each other, a profound, quiet understanding passing between them, a silent promise whispered in the pre-dawn light. Later, after the fever broke and Noah had finally fallen back into a deep, peaceful sleep, Mary leaned into James, resting her head on his shoulder. "I've been so scared," she whispered, her voice raw, "to trust again. But I see now. You've changed." "I had to," James said, his voice husky with emotion. "For him. For you. For us." Mary closed her eyes, a silent battle raging within her. Then, softly, she whispered, "Then maybe we can try again. Slowly. One day at a time." "One day at a time," James echoed, taking her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, a silent vow exchanged in the hushed intimacy of the bakery. As the first light of morning spilled across the bakery sign, Lucia's dream, it glowed softly, like a promise. Inside, a family was beginning again, whole, healing, and finally, at peace. 1 year later, the Whitaker household had settled into a quiet rhythm of profound joy, far from the relentless noise and harsh glare of the city. They now lived in a warm, sunlit home, nestled comfortably in the leafy suburbs of New York. The sprawling yard was always scattered with toys, vibrant chalk drawings, and the infectious sound of children's laughter. A classic white picket fence bordered the flourishing garden where Emily had proudly planted towering sunflowers, and Noah meticulously tended a small patch for tomatoes, insisting he wanted to grow real food, just like at the bakery. Mary's bakery, Lucia's dream, was thriving, a beloved local institution. Every morning, a line of eager customers snaked out the door, waiting for her famous cinnamon rolls and delicate lemon tarts. The walls of the shop were now filled with charming drawings from neighborhood children, including many vibrant contributions from Emily and Noah, who spent their afternoons there doing homework and, of course, sneaking extra cookies. James had willingly stepped back from the relentless helm of his empire. He still attended key meetings, offering his strategic insights, but his schedule now largely orbited around school pickups, the cherished ritual of bedtime stories and impromptu dance parties that spontaneously erupted in their sun-drenched kitchen. Noah and Emily had truly become inseparable. They built magnificent forts, raced bikes with wild abandon down the sidewalk, and painted colorful murals on the walls of the garage. To them, there had never been a before, only this beautiful now, where they were simply brother and sister, heart and soul, bound by an unbreakable bond. On a golden September afternoon, bathed in the soft, mellow light of early autumn, James and Mary hosted a small, intimate celebration in their backyard. The rustic picnic table was adorned with vibrant wildflowers, and soft, melodic music played from a speaker tucked discreetly beneath the porch. Friends from the bakery, a few close neighbors, and their small, growing family gathered to celebrate the anniversary of the day everything had changed, the day they had all truly become one family. James expertly grilled burgers and hot dogs while Mary brought out her signature strawberry shortcake, a delightful masterpiece. Emily danced around in a frothy pink tutu, her movements full of unrestrained joy, while Noah, with quiet efficiency, helped set the table, carefully arranging the plates and cutlery. As the sun began its gentle dip toward the horizon, casting long, warm shadows, James tapped his glass with a spoon, signaling for attention. "Thank you all for being here," he said, his voice full of warmth and genuine emotion. "A year ago, I had no idea that my life was about to change forever. But it did, in the absolute best way possible, and today, I want to celebrate the heart of our home, the true center of our world, our family." Mary smiled beside him, her eyes glowing with love and happiness. Just then, Noah and Emily came running forward, their faces alight with a shared secret. "We have a surprise!" Emily squealed, her voice bubbling with excitement. They handed their parents a large, carefully folded piece of paper. When James opened it, his breath caught in his chest. It was a drawing, crayon strokes full of vibrant color and heartfelt emotion. 4 figures, unmistakably them, stood holding hands beneath a radiant setting sun. Above them, in wobbly, earnest letters, it read, "Our family forever." Mary's hand instinctively found James's, their fingers intertwining, and their eyes met in a moment of profound understanding. No words were needed. James leaned down, pressing a tender kiss to the top of each child's head, then turned to Mary, his gaze full of a new unspoken promise. "There's something scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "To trust again. But I see now you've changed." "I had to," James replied, his voice thick with emotion. "For him. For you. For us." Mary closed her eyes, a deep breath escaping her. "Then maybe we can try again," she murmured. "Slowly. One day at a time." "One day at a time," James whispered, taking her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, a silent, powerful vow in the quiet of the bakery. As the morning light spilled across the newly erected sign, "Lucia's Dream." It glowed softly, like a beacon of promise in the breaking dawn. Inside, a family was beginning again, whole, healing, and finally, at peace. 1 year later, the Whitaker household had settled into a quiet, joyful rhythm, a world away from the clamor and intense scrutiny of the city. They now lived in a warm, sunlit home, nestled in the leafy suburbs of New York. The yard was a constant playground, always scattered with toys, vibrant chalk drawings, and the infectious sound of children's laughter. A classic white picket fence bordered the flourishing garden where Emily had proudly planted towering sunflowers, and Noah meticulously tended a small patch for his tomatoes, insisting he wanted to grow real food, just like at the bakery. Mary's bakery, Lucia's Dream, was thriving, a beloved cornerstone of the community. Every morning, locals lined up, eager for her famous cinnamon rolls and delicate lemon tarts. The walls of the shop were now adorned with colorful drawings from neighborhood children, including many vibrant contributions from Emily and Noah, who spent their afternoons there, doing homework and, of course, sneaking extra cookies. James had gracefully stepped back from the relentless helm of his corporate empire. He still attended key meetings, lending his sharp insights, but his schedule now primarily orbited around school pickups, the cherished ritual of bedtime stories, and impromptu dance parties that spontaneously erupted in their sun-drenched kitchen. Noah and Emily had become truly inseparable. They built magnificent forts, raced bikes with joyful abandon down the sidewalk, and painted colorful murals on the garage walls. To them, there had never been a before, only this beautiful now, where they were simply brother and sister, heart and soul. On a golden September afternoon bathed in the soft, mellow light of early autumn, James and Mary hosted a small, intimate celebration in their backyard. The rustic picnic table was adorned with fragrant wildflowers, and soft, melodic music played from a speaker tucked discreetly beneath the porch. Friends from the bakery, a few close neighbors, and their small, growing family gathered to commemorate the anniversary of the day everything had transformed. The day they had all truly become one family. James expertly grilled burgers and hot dogs while Mary brought out her signature strawberry shortcake, a delightful masterpiece. Emily danced around in a frothy pink tutu, her movements full of unrestrained joy, while Noah, with quiet efficiency, helped set the table, carefully arranging the plates and cutlery. As the sun began its gentle dip toward the horizon, casting long, warm shadows across the lawn, James tapped his glass with a spoon, signaling for attention. "Thank you all for being here," he said, his voice full of warmth and genuine emotion. "A year ago, I had no idea that my life was about to change forever. But it did, in the absolute best way possible. And today, I want to celebrate the heart of our home, the true center of our world, our family." Mary smiled beside him, her eyes glowing with love and happiness. Just then, Noah and Emily came running forward, their faces alight with a shared secret. "We have a surprise!" Emily squealed, her voice bubbling with excitement. They handed their parents a large, carefully folded piece of paper. When James opened it, his breath caught in his chest. It was a drawing, crayon strokes full of vibrant color and heartfelt emotion. 4 figures, unmistakably them, stood holding hands beneath a radiant, setting sun. Above them, in wobbly, earnest letters, it read, "Our family, forever." Mary's hand instinctively found James's, their fingers intertwining, and their eyes met in a moment of profound understanding that needed no words. James leaned down, pressing a tender kiss to the top of each child's head, then turned to Mary, his gaze full of a new, unspoken promise. "There's something I want to give you," he said softly. From his pocket, he took out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside lay a delicate silver ring, subtly engraved with 4 names: James, Mary, Noah, Emily. "This is not a proposal," he said, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes fixed on hers. "This is a promise that I will always be here for all of you, no matter what." Mary's eyes filled with tears, and she slipped the ring onto her finger, holding his gaze, her own promise shining through. "Then I promise the same," she whispered. As twilight settled over the yard, the family sat together on the porch swing, a tableau of quiet contentment. The children leaned against their parents, their eyes drooping from the long, joyful day. Laughter occasionally echoed from within the house, as fireflies blinked rhythmically in the darkening garden. James looked around, his heart full to bursting. "We may have lost each other once," he said, his voice soft, "but we're never letting go again." Mary nodded, her head resting gently against his shoulder, her hand finding his. And so the story ended, not with grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements, but with something far greater: a family, whole, forgiven, and utterly unbreakable. Under the fading light of a gentle sky, they simply held on to one another because love, real love, always finds its way home.